Hello.
Hey,
We are finally
back together.
Yeah. And going to read chapter 12 from Hinds Feet on High Places, and this is In the Mist. At the last storm, gradually as the last storm gradually died down, the clamor on the mountains ceased, and it was time to resume the journey. However, the weather had broken completely, and though the storm itself was over, thick mist and cloud remained, shrouding everything on the heights. When they started, the mist was so thick that they could see only the trees on either side of the narrow path, and even they looked ghostly and unreal. The rest of the forest was simply swallowed up and entirely lost to sight, veiled in a cold and clammy white curtain. The ground was dreadfully muddy and slippery, and although the path did not climb nearly so steeply as before, after some hours, Much Afraid found to her amazement that she was missing the rolling thunder of the storm and even the sickening crash of the trees as the lightning splintered them. She began to realize that, cowardly though she was, there was something in her which responded with a surge of excitement to the tests and difficulties of the way better than to easier and duller circumstances. It was true that fear sent a dreadful shuddering thrill through her, but nevertheless it was a thrill, and she found herself realizing with astonishment that even the dizzy precipice had been more to her liking than this dreary plodding on and on through the bewildering mist. In some way, the dangers of the storm had stimulated her. Now there was nothing but tameness, just a trudge forward, day after day, able to see nothing except for white, clinging mist which hung about the mountains without a gleam of sunshine breaking through. At last she burst out impatiently, "Will this dull, dreary mist ever lift, I wonder?" And would you believe it? A voice she knew all too well immediately answered from beyond the trees. "No, it won't," replied Resentment. "Moreover, you might just as well know now that this is going to continue for no one knows how long. Higher up the mountains, the mist hangs thicker and thicker still. That's all you can expect for the rest of this journey." Much Afraid pretended not to hear, but the voice went on again almost at once. "Have you noticed, Much Afraid, that the path which you're following isn't going up the mountains at all, but is almost level? You've missed the upward way, and you're just going around and around the mountain in circles." Much Afraid had not exactly noticed this fact, but now she could not help but realizing that it was true. They were not climbing at all, but simply moving along the mountainside with constant ups and downs, and the downs seemed to be getting more frequent. Could it be possible that they were really gradually descending the mountain instead of going up? In the bewildering mist, one simply could not see anything, and she found she had lost all sense of direction. On asking her companions what they thought about it, they answered rather shortly, because of course she ought not to have listened to any suggestion from Resentment, that they were on the path which the shepherd had pointed out, and would certainly not allow anyone to persuade them to leave it. "But," persisted Much Afraid, "don't you think that we may have missed the way in this mist? The shepherd said the path led upward, and you see, this one doesn't. It runs along the side of the mountain. There may easily have been a more direct way up which we didn't notice in the mist." Their only answer was that they knew better than to listen to any suggestion made by Resentment. At that, the voice of Bitterness broke in quite clearly. "You might at least be willing to go back a little way and look, instead of insisting on going on and on along what may prove to be the wrong path, leading you around in circles." Sorrow and Suffering took absolutely no notice, but unfortunately Much Afraid did, and said with still greater petulance, "I think you ought to consider their suggestion. Perhaps it would be better to go back a little way and see if we miss the right path. Really, it is no use going on in circles and getting nowhere." To this they replied, "Well, if we are going around in circles, we shall eventually arrive back where we started. And if we keep our eyes open, we shall be able to see the path we missed, always provided that it does exist, and is not just a bit of imagination on the part of bitterness. You poor little thing, came the whisper of self-pity through the mist. It is too bad that you have been put in the charge of such obstinate mule-like creatures. Just think of the time you are wasting, getting nowhere at all. Trudge, day after day, and nothing to show for it. You ought to be getting up onto the high places. So they went on, whispering and talking at her through the clinging mist, which shrouded everything and made it all seem so ghostly and dreary. Of course she ought not to have listened to them, but the mist was so bewildering and the path so unspeakably tame that she found something in her heart responding to them almost against her will. Suffering doggedly led the way, and sorrow, just as doggedly, was her rear guard, so that there was no possibility of turning back. But Much Afraid found herself limping and slipping and stumbling, far more often and badly than at any other stage of the journey. It made her very disagreeable and difficult to deal with. It is true that after every stumble, her conscience smote her, and she apologized sorrowfully and abjectly to her companions, but that did not prevent her from slipping again, almost directly afterwards. Although it was a miserable time, and the mist, instead of clearing, seemed to be getting thicker and colder and drearier than ever. At last, one afternoon, when the only word which at all described her progress is to say that she was slithering along the path, all muddy and wet, bedraggled from constant slips, she decided to sing. It has not been mentioned before, but Much Afraid did not possess the gift of a sweet voice any more than a pretty face. It is true that she was fond of singing, and that if the shepherd sang with her, she could keep in tune and manage quite nicely. But if she tried alone, the results were by no means so good. However, the mist was so thick and clammy that she was nearly stifled, and she felt she must do something to try to cheer herself and to drown the ghostly voices which kept whispering to her through the trees. It was not pleasant to think of her relatives now having the opportunity to entertain themselves at the expense of her very unmelodious voice, but she decided to risk their comments. If I sing quite loudly, she told herself, I shall not be able to hear what they say. The only song that she could think of at the moment was one which Sorrow had taught her in the hut, and though it seemed singularly inappropriate, she lifted up her voice and sang quaveringly. How lovely and how nimble are thy feet, O prince's daughter! They flash and sparkle, and can run more fleet than running water. On the mountains there is no gazelle, no roe or hind can overtake thee, nor can leap as well, but lag behind. There was perfect silence as she sang. The loud, sneering voices of her enemies had died away altogether. It is a good idea, said Much Afraid to herself jubilantly. I wish I'd thought of it before. It is a much better way to avoid hearing what they're saying than putting cotton in my ears. And I believe, yes, I really do, that there is a little rift in the mist ahead. How lovely. I shall sing the verse again. And she did so. Why, Much Afraid, said a cheery voice close behind her. I have not heard that song before. Where did you learn it? There, striding towards her, with a particularly pleased smile on his face, was the shepherd himself. It is just impossible to describe the words of joy in Much Afraid when she saw him really coming towards them on that dreary mountain path, where everything had been swallowed up for so long in the horrible mist, and everything one touched had been so cold and clammy. Now with his coming, the mist was rapidly clearing away, and a real gleam of sunshine, the first they had seen for days, broke through at last. "Oh, shepherd," she gasped, and caught hold of his hand, and could say no more. It really had seemed as though she would never see him again. "Tell me," he repeated cheerily, as he smiled at them, "where did you learn that song, Much Afraid?" "Sorrow taught it to me," she said. "I didn't think that she knew any songs, shepherd, but she said the words and music came to her as we were climbing up through the forest. I asked her to teach it to me, because I know I am a goose, but it makes me think of the time when you will have made my feet like Hinds' feet, and I won't ever have to slither along again." And she looked shamefacedly at her bedraggled and muddy condition. I'm glad you sing it, said the shepherd, more pleasantly than ever. I think it is a particularly nice song. Indeed, he added, smiling, I think I will add another verse to it myself. And at once he began to sing these words to the same tune. Thy joints and thighs are like a supple band, on which are met fair jewels which a cunning master hand hath fitly set. In all the palace search wherever you please, in every place there's none that walks with such a queenly ease, nor with just grace. Oh, shepherd, exclaimed Much Afraid, where did you find that verse to fit so nicely in the tune with Sorrow taught me? Again he smiled at her in the nicest possible way and answered, The words came to me just now as I followed you along the path. Poor Much Afraid, who knew that she had been slipping and stumbling in a most dreadful way, indeed worse than at any other time, flushed painfully all over her face. She said nothing, only looked at him almost reproachfully. Much Afraid, he said very gently, in answer to that look. Don't you know by now that I never think of you as you are, but only as you will be when I have brought you to the kingdom of love and washed you from all the stains and defilements of the journey? If I come along behind you and notice that you are finding the way especially difficult and are suffering from slips and falls, it only makes me think of what you will be like when you are with me, leaping and skipping on high places. Wouldn't you like to learn and sing my verse just as much as the one which Sorrow taught you? Yes, said Much Afraid thankfully, and taking his hand again, certainly I will learn it, and sing it about the cunning master hand which takes such pains with me. By this time, the mist had actually melted right away, and the sun, shining brilliantly, was making the dripping trees and grass sparkle with joy and brightness. All three thankfully accepted the suggestion of the shepherd that they should sit down for a short time and rest and enjoy the sunshine. Sorrow and Suffering withdrew a little, as they always did when the shepherd was present, leaving him to talk with Much Afraid alone. She told him all of the dismal tale of their long wanderings in the mist, and the way resentment, bitterness, and self-pity had been bothering her, and her fear that perhaps after all they had wandered from the path and lost their way. Did you really think that I would let you stray from the right path to the high places without doing anything to warn you or prevent it? Asked the shepherd quietly. She looked down at him sorrowfully and said with a sigh, When resentment and the others are shouting at me, I am always ready to believe anything, no matter how preposterous. You had better become a singer, he said, smiling. Then you won't hear what they say to you. Ask Sorrow and Suffering if they have any more songs which they can teach you. Do you find them good guides, Much Afraid? She looked at him earnestly and nodded her head. Yes, very good. I never could have believed it possible, shepherd, but in a way, I have come to love them. When I first saw them, they looked so terrifyingly strong and stern, and I was sure that they would be rough with me and just drag me along without caring how I felt. How I dreaded it. But they have dealt with me very, very kindly indeed. I think they must have learned to be so gentle and patient with me by seeing your gentleness. I never could have managed without them, she went on gratefully. And the queer thing is that I have a feeling that they really like helping an ugly little cripple like me in this way. They do truly want to get me up to the high places, not just because it is a commandment which you have given them, but also because they want a horrid coward like myself to get there and be changed. You know, shepherd, it makes a great difference in my feelings towards them, not to look upon them any longer with dread, but as friends who want to help me. I know it seems ridiculous, but sometimes I get the feeling that they really love me and want to go with me of their own free will. As she finished speaking, she looked up in his face and was surprised to see that he actually looked as though he were trying not to laugh. He said nothing for a moment or two, but turned slightly so that he could look around the two guides. Much Afraid looked too. They were sitting apart in the background and were unaware that they were being watched. They sat close to one another and were looking away up to the mountains towards the high places. Their veils had been thrown back, although she still could not see their face because their back were toward the shepherd and herself. She was struck by the fact that they seemed even taller and stronger than when she had first seen them waiting for her at the foot of the mountains. There was something almost indescribably majestic about them at that moment. a sort of radiant eagerness expressed in their attitude. They were talking quickly to one another, but their voices were so low that she could not catch what they were saying. Was it possible? Yes, it was. They were actually laughing. That they were talking about something which thrilled them with eagerness and expectation, she felt quite sure. The shepherd watched them for a few moments without speaking. Then he turned back to Much Afraid. His eyes were laughing at her, but he said quite gravely, "Yes, I really believe you're right, Much Afraid. They do look to me as though they really enjoy their task, and perhaps even a little affection for the one they serve." Then he really did laugh out loud. Sorrow and Suffering dropped their veils back over their faces and looked around to see what was happening. But the shepherd had something more to say before he sped them further on the journey. The laughter died out on his face, and very seriously he asked, "Do you love me enough to be able to trust me completely, Much Afraid?" She looked at him in the usual startled fashion so natural to her whenever she sensed that he was preparing her for a new test, and then faltered. "You know that I do love you, shepherd, as much as my cold little heart is capable. You know that I love you, and that I long to trust you as much as I love you, that I long both to love and trust you still more. Would you be willing to trust me," he asked, "even if everything in the wide world seemed to say that I was deceiving you, indeed that I had deceived you all along?" She looked up at him in perplexed amazement. "Why, yes," she said, "I'm sure I would, because one thing I know to be true. It is impossible that you should tell a lie. It is impossible that you should deceive me. I know that I am often very frightened at the things which you ask me to do," she added shamefacedly and apologetically, "but I could never doubt you in that way. It's myself I'm afraid of, never you. And though everyone in the world should tell me that you had deceived me, I should know it was impossible." "Oh, shepherd," she implored, "don't tell me that you think I really doubt you, even when I am most afraid and cowardly and despicably weak. You know I trust you. In the end, I know I shall be able to say, 'Thy gentleness hath made me great.'" He said nothing for a little, only looked down very tenderly, almost pitifully, at the figure now crouching at his feet. Then after a time he said very quietly, "Much Afraid, supposing I really did deceive you, what then?" It was then that her turn to be quite silent, trying to grasp this impossible thing which he was suggesting, and to think what her answer would be. What then? Would it be that she could never trust and never love him again? Would she have to be alive in the world where there was no shepherd, only a mirage and broken lovely dream? To know that she had been deceived by one she was certain could not deceive? To lose him? Suddenly she burst into a passion of weeping, and then after a little while looked straight up into his face and said, "My Lord, if you can deceive me, you may. It can make no difference. I must love you as long as I continue to exist. I cannot live without loving you." He laid his hands on her head, then with a touch more tender and gentle than anything she had ever felt, repeated as though to himself, "If I can, I may deceive her." Then without another word he turned and went away. Much Afraid picked up a little icy cold pebble which was laying on the ground where he had stood, put it in her bag, then tremblingly rejoined Sorrow and Suffering, and they continued their journey. That was the end of chapter 12. There's a lot in this one.
Mm-hmm. You know, when we were reading it, actually, I was thinking of that movie, what is it called? The one with the emotions in her head, that, like, Pixar movie.
Oh. Why can I not remember what it's called? With joy and sadness and disgust and anger.
Right.
Inside Out.
Inside Out, yeah. So, it shows what's going on in the mom and the dad's head. You know, and the daughter is ruled by joy. right? It makes all of her decisions. She's the head emotion, joy. But in the mom, the head emotion is sadness. And, you know, like, just having watched the movie, you watch this girl who's becoming a teenager have to deal with other emotions, and how Joy didn't think that sadness was necessary. She's just annoyed by her, she's ruining everything and all of this. And, you know, as you mature, the things you go through mature you, you know, I mean, like, they change you, and not everything is ruled by joy, but by sorrow and sadness,
right,
and suffering. And it tempers you, and it pushes you, and it, you know, like, it, I don't know, it makes you kind of grow up,
right,
you know. And I was just thinking about that, because she was saying, you know, actually, I really like them, and I think they really love me, and they just really want me to get to where I'm going. They're pushing me. There's one before her, there's one behind her, and they're not going to let her get off of that path. And, like, the things that we have to go through in this life that God allows us to go through grow us in Him. They grow us up in Him. They mature us in Him. They push our trust, and they make us choose to trust Him. Like, because, you know, and like, even when she was saying, you know, like, she missed the thrill of the storm, and that, you know, even though she's a coward, at least that was a thrill, and she didn't realize that she missed it until it was gone. And now she's on this trudging, boring, misty trail, and she has to choose to trust that God has her on the right path. And I don't know, I just, that movie just popped to my mind. I was like,
that's a good way to relate it. I was thinking too about, because I feel like I've been in different similar places. The first thing I thought about when it was talking about that the mist was so thick that you couldn't see but except right in front of you, and that really it's this way because they're getting so high on the mountain. Like, they're actually ascending so far up the mountain
that it's in the clouds.
That it's right. And I was thinking about the last couple years in my life, you know, like 2 years ago when God told me to quit my job, and He wanted me to stay home at least for a little while, and He didn't tell me what I would be doing, but He did tell me that I would not be working as a nurse again. And that was, of course, extremely difficult for me. But He revealed to me that I was going through a part of my life where I can't see what's ahead. All I can see is what one step in front of me at a time. And it made me think about this. And then realizing, I was like, oh, that kind of sounds similar to what God has had me going through. And then I thought,
then to have bitterness and resentment and self-pity pop up and tell you, you're on the wrong path, you don't know where you're going. You should at least go back and see if you missed one.
Oh, and now I'll get to that in a second, because it just made me think of another thought. But I guess realizing, like, how far up she actually is. And then thinking about that in my own life, and how we don't realize.
Well, you can't see the horizon.
Right. And you know, you really have to stop and think about, okay, where was I at 5 years ago in my walk with God? My Facebook can tell me where I was at 5 years ago. And there's times when I am so thankful nobody else can see. Your like memories. When memories like post, and like when we worked at MHMR. Oh my gosh,
it was pretty toxic.
It was very toxic work environment, but I handled it in a toxic way. And what did I do?
I mean, like, we
blasted it on my Facebook and using
F-bombs. Super mature.
Yes, and I look back at my immaturity.
Yeah.
And I think I was 25 when I wrote all that stuff, more like 13 maybe mentally. I'm just ashamed, like, oh my gosh, Megan,
that makes
grow
me thankful
up.
that I didn't I've never really been into
Facebook,
so there's
yeah.
not like a public record of my
I just am thankful
immaturity,
that nobody
you know?
can see those. That's in the past.
Yeah, let it go.
Yeah. And that nobody else can see it but me. But also seeing how far I've come from then to now, and realizing I'm in a place where God is asking me to trust Him step by step, because I have come so far.
Right.
Because 5 years ago,
You couldn't have done that.
I couldn't. I wouldn't have been able. I was still barely even able to recognize the voice of God or discern the voice of God.
Right.
Truly. At
As
that
opposed
point.
to other voices.
Yes, and learning how to weed them out. And yes, how bitterness, resentment, self-pity, oh my gosh, and how this last year that I've been staying home.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like this is where I'm at.
Oh, poor little me.
The trudging along, and that I gave up my career for what? To stay home and do laundry, and I'm an educated woman. I'm supposed to be washing laundry and cleaning toilets for a living. Which of course He has dealt with me in that too, in my heart, that's not what it is. It's
caring for your family.
Caring for my family and putting my family first and my children first, and there's very much honor in that.
Yeah.
And but even the voices, yes, though, that still pop up every now and then, and then spiral me into like little seasons of depression where I don't want to do anything.
Yes. I mean, like being in a place that feels like dreary plodding on, and and just trudge forward day after day, and you see nothing but white clinging mist hung about the mountains, and no sunshine, and and it does get depressing, and it gets hard. And every time I feel like that, I remember that verse in Galatians, let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due time we will reap the reward. And it's hard, especially if you're in that place. It doesn't feel like you're doing good. It doesn't feel like you're doing anything that makes a difference to anybody. And even
it said that she was limping and stumbling
and falling
even more.
And covered in mud because she was listening to resentment and bitterness and self-pity. And, like earlier in the book, when she listens to pride, she would fall and her feet would hurt and, all of that. And because she's not focused on what she's supposed to be focused on. But I love that just sort of out of nowhere, she's like, you know what, I think I'm going to sing. And, whatever. And it's not a coincidence that the moment she decides to stop focusing on this and put her focus on worshiping God, He shows up, and He's been following her the whole time, watching her.
And that makes me think about the scripture, I can't remember how it's worded, that His presence inhabits the praise of His people.
Oh, yeah.
And she started singing His
and then
praises.
He showed, and then there's the sun shining and
melting away the dreary. Yes. How many times I've been much afraid. Yes. Just poor pitiful me, and how when you finally sorry, I'm having issues today. When you finally
you shift your focus,
how it all just, and then you find yourself looking back over the past week or however many days, like, what happened?
Oh my gosh, yes.
It's almost like you feel like a different person, and you want to get on to whoever that is. Like, why were you doing?
Why did you do
that when you, when you sing, you feel better. You know that all you have to do is say Jesus. And why didn't you? Instead, I've been vegging out on the couch watching Reba for 3 days and ignoring life, pretending it'll go away, and then as soon as you come back to reality, you still have to deal with it anyway.
Yes, they're waiting for you. Yes. Yeah, always. Yeah, I feel like I've been in that area for the last couple of weeks, and I mean I got sick, and then all of this other stuff was going on, and I just got really down. But I've been reading my Bible in the morning again and listening to praise and worship again. And, not that I didn't, but I don't know. Like, I just
You had
wasn't
that shift.
around it.
The
You know,
shift.
I don't, for some weird reason. Like, that's hardly ever happened to me. But anyway, yeah, there's been a shift, and I'm so thankful. The sun is shining through again. Like,
Yeah. Yes. Me too.
And I like too that in the book they have like, because this is like that really pretty version, but they have like a little devotional page in there, and it says, take a moment to reflect on a time when you aimlessly wandered through the mist, slipping and falling down life's path. In what ways did you sense the Good Shepherd following behind you, allowing you to stumble in order to prepare you for the high places? And I think, you know, we kind of already have talked about that, but just that that he does that. He allows it, because then, you know, you're sort of forced to choose. I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to, you know, like, I'm going to trust you. And I love that she says, if you can deceive me, you can. And that he repeats it like, if I can deceive her. It's a good answer, much afraid. You know, like,
Yeah.
But that she trusts him so completely that if he was able to, she would allow him to deceive her, even though she doesn't believe that he can. You know? And I just loved that. I was like, oh, that's a good answer, much afraid.
And I felt like a couple of places here kind of hit on what we were just talking about earlier about trusting, like, and it said, you know, is God a man that he can lie? Like, she knows he's not a man that can lie. So if he's told her that something will happen, it will. It will. And we were just talking about that earlier. Right. You know, not giving up, even though the path doesn't look
like it's going up.
Like it's going to that place. Yeah. That God has showed you already, that finished work. And even though you're over here somewhere still trying to get there, that it's coming. Yes.
Yeah. It's just not there yet.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what, well, actually, that's what I was telling Danny. I was like, I believe that it will happen because he said it would. It's just getting there is going to suck. And it does. You know, like there's a lot of slipping and falling and mud and muck and drudgery and all of that stuff. It's not fun. Yeah. It's not fun. But the end result is worth it. Yeah. You know, like you just have to keep focused on that and not on the suckiness.
I like that. Yes. I wish I had my tissues. I can't get out right now to go. Absolutely. It's, well, and the singing. Yes. Praise. It's the praise. Yes. The worship. It takes your focus off. Yeah. It
refocuses on what you should be focused on. You know.
The goodness of God.
Yeah. I know. Like, and you know that song that Pastor Kevin's always singing, you know, all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you've been good to me. So all the days of my life I will sing, you know, like of the goodness of God. And it's true. Like, you can look back and see all the places that God was there for you, that he made a way, that he, you know, he made this move, he did this, he did that, you know, he was there to pick you up when you fall, or, you know, whatever. He's always there. You just have to remember, you know, like, like I know I get so irritated at the Israelites, you know, like, oh my gosh, like he was a pillar of cloud in front of you, you know. Yeah.
I wish I had a pillar of fire in front of me.
Like, oh, that's the path. I think I'll follow that, you know, like, but they didn't remember. It was like they went to bed and forgot that they got fed with manna all day, you know, the day before. Or, you know, but I know they didn't have the Holy Spirit living inside them like we do now, but we do the same thing. We forget all the things that God's done for us.
And how much worse that we have the Holy Spirit living inside of us. And that we still give into it.
Yes, and we still listen to bitterness.
Well, that's what, you know, Cody said yesterday about something that God has told us would happen that seems impossible. There's no logical way.
Yeah.
But he's told us, and he brought that up just yesterday, because we were grumbling and complaining to each other, and God reminded him. He was sitting out on the porch by himself, and God reminded him about the grumbling Israelites.
Yeah.
And and that because of that, many of them didn't get to see their promised land because of their rebellion. And I said, but you know what? It wasn't just their grumbling.
No, they allowed.
I said, what happened? They attempted to go take it for themselves. After, the 10 spies.
Because they sent the spies out, and 8 of them came back saying, or I guess they sent 12 spies.
Right, and 10 came back and said, we can't do this.
We can't do this.
Well, then Joshua and Caleb said, yes, we can.
Right.
And so...
Which is why they got to go into the promised land.
Right.
Because they trusted God.
But then, I don't know if it was, the next day or, but in the next scene, what it shows is that the people, so then God had, oh, no, you're right. It wasn't because they tried to take it for themselves.
Right. Because they refused to try to follow God to take it.
That was why. Yeah, because they refused.
Those 10 spies spread
so you're
fear
right.
throughout.
I was thinking about, because he had already told them
right
at that point, okay, well, now you don't get to receive it. And then they rebelled again and said, oh, no, we're going.
Oh, yeah.
And they were told,
and they were
don't do this.
Out. Yeah.
Right. And and then they had defeat.
Because they were disobedient.
And their disobedience, because then they tried to go do it for themselves.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. We'll really go. We'll go.
Right.
How
but
many
it
times
was
do our
too
kids
late.
do that? Oh, it's too late.
But it was too late.
Yeah.
And not that God's not merciful.
No.
But he
did let them go, but only after the disbelieving generation
had died.
Was gone. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was their unbelief.
It
was their fear and unbelief that caused them not to receive.
Yeah.
And we do that so often.
Yeah.
And we don't even have giants, literal giants with swords to battle.
Right.
We have demons.
Yes.
But we know that our God is greater.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
Yeah, but when you're facing one, it still is, scary.
Mm-hmm.
When you're having to actually engage in spiritual warfare against something, there is still, a thrill of fear that comes through you, because you're battling something that's scary. I mean, and logically, my God is greater than he who's in the earth, but it's still kind of scary,
Yes. And anyway,
fear is sneaky.
Yeah, it is sneaky.
It sneaks up on you.
So, well, and that reminds me about too what because of the dream I was telling you about this morning, and you brought up what God had done for me a couple years ago, and I had forgotten.
Oh, really?
I had forgotten about that, and I needed the reminder because I had a nightmare last night that was so bad that I woke up just
terrified,
sweating, and terrified. I mean, I literally was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't even move, and was afraid to open my eyes because I didn't want the demons to know I was awake.
Right.
I was that scared.
Or to be standing over you, any of that stuff.
Well, no, I
childhood
my
type
thought
fears,
was that they would know I was awake.
Right.
And I, like I told you, I was asleep with my back towards the room. And so, of course, when you're scared, your first instinct is to turn over.
To cover your back, yeah.
But I was so scared. I was
move.
too scared to even move.
Yeah.
That's how scared I was from that dream. And I was telling Jessica about this nightmare that I had, and she reminded me about a few years ago. I had this vision. It was when I was going through my Free Indeed Bible study and preparing for deliverance. I hadn't gone through deliverance yet, but I was preparing, and I was still smoking at the time, and I was sitting up late doing my Bible study, and I went outside to go smoke. And as soon as I opened the door, in the spirit, not in the physical, but in the spirit, something lunged at my face, like raw, like grisly, from a horror movie.
Yeah.
Something just with teeth and spit and
like this close to your face. Yeah.
And was screaming at me.
That still gives me goosebumps up and down my legs. Like,
but I was determined to have that cigarette.
yeah.
So I had, and I was like this, you know, scoot, and
the power of addiction, people.
smoked my cigarette, and then I had to call Cody and wake him up.
Yeah.
Because he was asleep. And I had to call him. I said, will you come and watch me walk back in the house? I was so scared.
The demon just jumped at me, and I'm freaked out.
Yeah. Well, later I got back in the house, and God revealed to me a couple things. First of all, I was protected inside my home. The demon was outside.
Right.
Waiting for the open door.
For the opportunity, yeah.
The crack. And as soon as I opened that door, which is disobedience, unbelief,
any of that,
rebellion. You open that door, it's right there. It's waiting to devour you. So he revealed that to me for like convicting me. But then he actually showed me what that demon looked like
to him.
To him, right, in the spirit, and not because fear is a liar.
Right. Yeah.
And fear is a deceiver.
Right.
And he showed me, and it made me laugh. It was like, ooh, I'm gonna scare you. You know,
Boo.
like, yeah, boo. And so like and it made me laugh so hard. I was like, that's what that demon looks like. And he was like, yep.
That's what scared you into calling your husband awake.
Yeah.
Walk you back in the house.
Right. And so it put things in, not to say that I didn't have fear after that, or I was never afraid of anything, but when that fear would start, you know, create that panic fear would start, it's like God would bring.
Panic is unreasonable. You
Yeah.
can't control that.
And it's terror.
Yeah.
It's terror. And when that would start to come back, God would give me that vision of, and I would be like, oh, that's right. My God's bigger.
Get out of here.
Get away, fear. Go.
Yeah, beat it.
And it gave me so much peace at that time in my life. And anyway, so when you reminded me this morning about the Gumby demon, that's what it made me think. You know, like those things that blow at the car.
Yes,
yeah, that's what it made
the
me
little
think about,
windsock
with like
guys,
these really big eyes saying boo.
Yeah.
So I thought about that, you know, because even when I was telling you about the dream, it's like
you still felt.
Yeah, I could still feel that
in there.
And when you reminded me of that, I was like, oh yeah,
It's a junior high boy.
Fear is a liar.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it just like what Much Afraid is going through, these fearing relatives are deceiving her.
Yes, at
They're
every
getting
turn.
in her head and telling her, oh, Much Afraid,
Oh, poor little
you
Much
probably
Afraid.
missed the turn.
Yeah.
You should go back. I bet maybe they're right. Maybe I should go back.
To the point of like getting snippy with her guides, like,
and resentful of them.
Yes.
And bitter towards.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And feeling sorry for herself and all of that. Yeah. Been there.
Me too. Yeah. And but Jesus comes and parts the clouds and brings the sunshine.
But only when she turns the corner, or you know, like chooses to not listen
that's
to them.
what
She made the decision to block them out.
It was intentional.
Yes.
It was of her free
Even
will.
in the fear of them making fun of her.
Right, because
And
of
she
knowing,
thought, if I just sing louder, I won't hear them talking crap about me. And in that in itself is an act of courage.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, to make the choice. And I'm not going to listen to that. You know, like that lady. Anybody who wasn't speaking life over her husband.
Oh yeah, she just shut it down.
Out, you know,
right.
like, nope, I'm not hearing that. I'm not listening to that. I know what God said, and that's all I'm going to listen to. And so, and singing, you know, we were just talking about that on Friday. That song, "My Weapon Is a Melody," is true. You know, like, it's true. Because, like Kevin was talking about on Sunday, like, it's not, you know, like he was talking about baptism, but even in, like, singing worship, like during worship time or any time that you're worshiping, there's something that happens. Like, it's powerful, and our words have power. And so when you're singing praise to God, worshiping God, then those words don't have any power.
Right.
Those words of the enemy, they don't have the power that they have, because the words you're saying have more power.
Just like,
I guess.
just like the declarations.
Right,
too.
yeah. You're speaking God's truth into the atmosphere. Like,
And-
you're changing the atmosphere by what you're
Right,
doing.
and it does. You can feel
The
a
change,
shift
yes.
in the atmosphere. And I know when I don't, if it comes to my mind to say the declarations and I don't want to,
Then you go get them.
then I know.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, oh, it's
Something's going on
not
here.
me that
Yeah.
doesn't want to say these
Yeah.
declarations. And I told Cody that yesterday too, because we were arguing about something. I got the declarations out and he was feeling that way. I don't feel like it. I said, well, then we really need to.
Yeah.
You know, and we did pray together, you know, and he didn't want to say the declarations, and so I played them on the radio. You know.
Oh, you don't want to say them? I'm just going to play them
Yeah,
out.
I played them on, you know, or not the radio. It's not called the
Yeah.
radio anymore, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then I made the whole car. I was like, come on, guys, come on.
Everybody say it.
I am a child of God, you know, and even the kids, and Adeline was in the back seat. I'm a child of God. I've been chosen as a personal friend of Jesus Christ. And, you know, you just can't help it.
Yeah.
And even when they were over, and Cody said them too, and he said, thank you.
Yeah.
I really needed that. Thank you for playing that. I said, you're welcome. I said, because it was not you that did not want to say the
It was
declarations.
other Cody.
And it's almost like a knife. It's like you can just feel it slice
The word of
through.
God is
Yes, a double-edged
a
sword. Right, and you can
Yes.
feel it.
Yeah.
You can
feel it separate.
it's so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, the words that we speak and the song. I just, I needed this.
Yes.
I needed
Me
this
too.
today.
Yeah.
Even if we're only preaching to ourselves.
Exactly.
We needed this. So, but anyway, anything else in particular?
No, I think
That was the meat of
we
it.
pretty much talked about every part of it. It's a good chapter.
And we're getting closer and closer.
Halfway.
It's so good. And the ending is just so beautiful. I just love this book. I think I've already said this like 50 million times, but this is a book that I want to continue to read at least like once a year.
Yeah, right.
You know, even just to myself. And I think this is probably maybe like my fourth time. No, maybe third. No, maybe fourth. Anyway, it's been 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
And every time I read it, it's better.
Yeah. We find more treasure in it, you know.
And I identify with different
you're
places.
within different places too. Yeah. I was gonna say, I think this chapter resonated with us so much because we both just come from this place.
Yeah.
A little bit, you know, like.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, so it's on my annual book list
Yes.
forever and ever.
Forever and ever and ever.
But thank y'all for listening, and we can make no promises, absolutely. Every time I say, like, we'll be back tomorrow, it ends up being like 7 days.
Yeah.
So when we're able, we're going to continue this to the end. Absolutely. So our schedules are weird and crazy, and we have all kinds of different stuff going on, but we are not giving up.
Yeah.
So if you have been listening and following,
you.
yes, thank
Yeah.
you for being patient with our inconsistency during this season. And we're going to continue trying to get back on track, but we will finish this book.
Oh yeah. There's only
And-
8 more chapters.
Yeah.
There's 20 chapters.
So, but thank you for listening so far. And if you're new to it or just came across this
Go back
randomly,
to chapter 1.
yeah, go back to chapter 1 and listen to the whole thing and hear about Much Afraid's journey. It's really beautiful. So y'all have a good day, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.